I think I've become really interested in the intersection of storytelling, so business rhythm and judgment, because in my opinion, I think that's where better discovery, stronger pipeline, and essentially more trustworthy forecasting can actually start.
Welcome to a new episode of Revenue Architects. This podcast is tailored for revenue leaders navigating the evolving landscape of sales, RevOps, and revenue management. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Joanna Connolly, Revenue Enablement Director at Ping Identity, where she partners across the go-to-market organization to improve opportunity management, sales execution, onboarding, coaching, and revenue performance. Joanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
All right, give us a quick background on how you got into revenue management.
Sure, yeah. I think I've had what most would describe as quite an eclectic career, from selling advertising space in newspapers, refurbished hardware, right then into kind of creative marketing, where I actually, fun fact, sent the first picture-based email for my company. So that's very exciting. And I then worked my way up to lead those teams along with business development for one of the world's actual biggest employers. But I'm really actually quite thankful for that diversity, because I think it's really given me and informed my perspective that I have today. And as I've now moved into this sort of revenue execution and enablement, it's given me all those necessary skills, which I think where that role hasn't existed previously in my career, I think it's one of those that I think it evolves, I think, from a lot of those different things. So for about the last 8 years, I've had the opportunity to see enablement and revenue acceleration as it is now in lots of different environments. So from smaller teams like tech startups, where kind of the basics of pipeline inspection had to be built from the ground up, where they've literally got one person selling, to more complex global organizations where the challenge is creating consistency across roles, managers, motions, and the globe, essentially. But across all of it, I think I've become really interested in the intersection of storytelling, so business rhythm and judgment, because in my opinion, I think that's where better discovery, stronger pipeline, and essentially more trustworthy forecasting can actually start.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. This is great. We had a conversation before. You described finding reps who are clicking deals into the commit stage in Salesforce with no qualifications underneath. So when you really trace that back to missing that business rhythm you were speaking about, where there's no inspection routines, no deal review cadence, no structure protecting sellers from the noise, that gap in CRM hygiene and real forecasting confidence still persists in a lot of companies we work with. So what does building a disciplined forecasting process actually look like from scratch?
I think it's one of the things that kind of stood out for me in that scenario. Just there was a lot of reps doing it really well, but then makes everything else go wrong. So I think what I moved into is basically they had no qualification discipline that sat underneath that justified the confidence they had. So when we think about storytelling in another way, they were kind of storytelling fiction through the customer's commit, shall we say. It's not really a CRM problem. It's more of that kind of business rhythm problem. And I think without the consistency, so without everybody doing that consistent inspection, the deal reviews and the cadence in place, where a manager-led rhythm for, I suppose, separating evidence from opinion, the system is always going to just reflect that noise. So rebuilding that forecasting from scratch really starts there. You can create a cadence for them. You can help define what good evidence looks like, introducing things like MEDDPICC. That was something that the qualification that sat underneath it. And that's really the bedrock, I think, for most companies, because it's a tried and tested method of being able to de-risk an opportunity. So you then move on to like helping managers coach, how they can inspect for customer movement, not just that seller confidence. So not being led down the garden path, should we say, by our reps, making sure that some of the questions that they can ask are really delving into helping de-risk, like I say, the opportunity itself. And over time, that forecast then can become more trustworthy because the deal conversation has got better upstream.
I remember a very funny story with a sales guy. Right? Once I was trying to hire a sales guy, and he was obviously an A-level sales guy, right? And I'm going to ask you a question about that. And we were talking, and I was explaining him the sales process, saying that this is the process we follow, this is what it is. You know what he did? He pointed to the window and said, "Do you see that BMW standing outside?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I got that because I'm good at my job. I don't need all this." I was like, I didn't know how to react. I was like, yeah, if you are a A1 sales guy, right? My question to you is, how do you deal with these kind of scenarios? You have A level, B level, C level sales guys.
Yeah,
So in that, if you are going to put a cadence in place, how do you deal with these kind of personalities?
it's difficult. Is probably the easiest answer. But you're absolutely right. You're never going to be able to meet everybody where they are. And if they're in a scenario where they're hitting their number, their forecasting is accurate, and actually, whatever behaviors it is they've got in the background, they might not be telling you what they are. And they probably are doing something that is close to what you're actually showing is good looks like, but they don't want to be verbal about it. So in most scenarios, all you can do is still follow the process, keep them involved in that process, and potentially take a step back and not necessarily coach in the same way you would coach another rep. So
Okay.
if they're like a seasoned rep, then you need to meet them where they are, and potentially it's just about helping them other ways, whether it's like, would you like me to send an email? If it's their sales director, they might send emails just to look like there's some executive connection. Is there a way in which we can help with business value in there? It becomes, I think, a different way to coach. It's not always about telling them what to do. You're showing them and you're helping them, and you're trying to create an environment that makes them feel confident in what they're doing. And that's essentially, I think, what we all try and do within revenue acceleration, or specifically where I am in enablement, is create that safe space, reduce the noise, give them tools that make them efficient, and give them things that are helpful, and not, I suppose, order them, because that's really not going to work.
I think I would say personally, I was one of those guys. And the way I got into actually doing a MEDDPICC, putting it into a CRM, was I had to be managed to it. I was 150% to goal, and my boss was like, if it's not in the CRM by Friday, I'm writing you up. And I was like, really? But we had built that relationship that I knew that she was doing this because she was like, look, there are bigger things happening and we need your data, right? And the data will help you and the data will help others. And I finally had to commit, but I had to be managed sometimes. It was like, look, I understand that you're doing it. I know you're doing it, but I have to prove it. And if I can't prove it, I can't support you when people don't see it. And it's like, because selling may not be even. There's an element there where good management, but having a good MEDDPICC process or something in the technology that allows me to see how I could take everything off of a piece of paper or an Excel spreadsheet and translate it into the CRM where I didn't have to think about it after I put it in because it was there for me when I needed it again.
In that scenario, where I have had situations in the past, where we've been in deal reviews and the rep has said, oh yeah, I can't put it into commit yet. And it's like, oh, looking at your conversations that you've had, it looks like it's very strong. And yeah, but I can't. So I've got no evidence now in the system to support your claim. So that's probably another reason why we should start documenting this within the CRM system. It doesn't have to be anything too arduous. I think to your point, there are probably a couple of different ways you can do it, but generally, I always think if you can help the 98%, then that's really good enough.
Change in behavior only happens by two things, right? One, you change their compensation plan, like Steve is saying, it's not in Salesforce, you're not going to get paid, it's not going to get counted. Or you show them that how they're putting data is really going to help them close the deal faster with lesser discount and better, right? And that will motivate them, saying, because again, their commission check is going to go up if they can close a deal faster plus with less discount. But you're right, it's not easy. It's person to person based. But that really brings me to my second thing that I had in mind about also bridging this gap, right, between the field and the RevOps. What you said in your last conversation was that you take a step forward to really look at how sales teams are doing things. Then you also take a step backward to say what product marketing is doing and what's coming. Right? So my question to you is, with that end-to-end view that you said you really take, and I want to understand a little more of that, is where is the most consistent break in the chain between what RevOps is designs and what actually lands in the field?
I think, like you say, definitely one of the most important parts of what we do is being able to put ourselves into that role and reality that the sellers and the managers are experiencing. Then be able to take a step back far enough to be able to see what is it that the business is trying to build next. And I think what we see is the kind of the most consistent breaking that chain is usually translation of language. If there's no curation of that information between those other areas, and then it doesn't go through us like a filter into the field. That is where kind of that biggest break can happen if we're not in that chain, if you like. They'll often design something like product teams and things like that. They're obviously like, I've designed something, it's logical, but then by the time it reaches the field, it's going to feel probably abstract, disconnected from actually what those live customer moments are really like. And I think that's why, as well, going back to my love for storytelling in enablement, I think people need to, like we said before, it's not just about understanding the process. It's understanding the why, the signal, what good looks like, and also what is it actually when they're in that conversation. I think we often spend a lot of time thinking about how we can make standards usable, memorable, and easy to apply in that flow of work. But realistically, the field doesn't really need more content. It just needs it to be like clearer signals, lower friction, because I think what we've seen when we've taken that approach, adoption is naturally rises when they can feel how that process is going to help them win. So to your point, like when we were thinking about qualification and MEDDPICC and maybe filling in a scorecard in the CRM system in Salesforce, if you can show them that intrinsically the detail that's going to be in there, and then building out a hierarchy, for example, in looking at where their customers are laid out within the company, having those two elements is going to help them be able to see more, know where their gaps are, be able to then, like I was saying, start de-risk that opportunity. So having that inspection element, having the opportunity to be able to see that, is they're going to then be able to spot those gaps and be able to, like I say, de-risk that situation.
I'll tell you, yesterday I was talking to my son. He's just completing 1 year. He's working in a healthcare company. And he was saying the same frustration actually we have heard. And this really comes down to here what happens on field. So he transitioned his role. It's a big thing. But now he's saying that company keeps telling me that this feature of our product is not adopted. Go and push it in the market. And he works with hospitals and doctors. And he said, when I talk to a doctor, says, we get 2 cases in a month. And we have manual process to handle it. I don't need a system and train 50 people of how to do all of that just for 2 cases, right? If there were 50 cases, yes, we will do it. And he says it's very hard now to communicate this back to their product marketing team, or saying that, guys, this feature is not applicable to everybody. So where the gap I felt is that when you're trying to, from RevOps to field, when it goes, one thing is, yes, the communication breakdowns, to your point. That is absolutely a fact, right? But second thing also is, it should be contextual, saying that in these kind of customer scenarios, do this. If that guidance is there, I think field might be much more prepared, because they are only focused on where I can get more business, where I can make more money. They honestly don't really care much.
Yeah, no, that curation is what I was saying is, so when it comes through us, we will look at, let's think about how do you position it, or the value statements that support it. What are our competitors saying? How can we help you with that competitive strategy? And then thirdly, you've got, okay, you're going to come up against some objections. So how do we handle those objections? Like your one only happens twice a month. And it's like, okay, but let's think about the impact of that. How big's that pain? And again, we find ourselves coming back to MEDDPICC in terms of how we're looking to qualify at these deals, but then you can translate that into then some of the things that we're doing. If we think about metrics, it's like, okay, what's the value? What are we doing about our competitive information? So all of those things, really, we do try and curate around either the journey, the customer journey, or we obviously then pepper it with those qualification elements. So I think going back to that kind of integrated strategy, if you like, of our sales methodology, qualification and process, if you've got those 3 things that are coming through, I think, into materials and the resources and everything you're thinking about, or decision buyer milestones that we have in our scenario, you're helping them push through. And I think that's where we can obviously enable impact on revenue and propensity of deal and really affect it.
Yeah, I think there's also, as Jay's talking, like from the product marketing across, there should be better communication. This is what we're building, this is what we're doing, here's how you sell it. But I think at the other side, it should be a bidirectional sync where, and I think revenue enablement is a good place for that to, what do they actually clients need? We need products that solve this problem, not that problem. Because if it's like, okay, if it's 2 times a month and it's manual, if it's not a big deal, no one wants it, right? So it's like, why did we spend energy, all that energy to build that? when this other problem is what they're complaining about. Let's solve that one, right? So that's a CS team, that's a frontline sales, getting resistance and opportunities, but all of that could be leading back to what product marketing should be really focused on. And so I do think there's an element there where it could go in both directions.
Oh yeah, I think definitely the sort of the transparency of honesty between everybody is great. We have lots of communication channels and things like that we utilize. And it's nice because there's a great ethos that we have of being open and honest. And I think you can still be nice about it. You can see those conversations happening, like around the business is great. I love seeing feedback being taken in the way that it should be, which is a gift. I always think that feedback is a gift because you need it. You need it to get better.
You said something earlier that I'm really just jazzing on, is you called it revenue acceleration team. Something as opposed to just revenue enablement. I really think you need a new title as a revenue accelerator. That's a brilliant construct. But as revenue management is growing into that understanding that we need to think about revenue in a more holistic sense, when did that shift happen for you when you started to think about, okay, I'm doing enablement, but now I'm really accelerating revenue? And what changed organizationally when you started to believe that's what actually I'm doing?
The shift happened for me, I think, when we just had a change in leadership. As simply as that. There was a change in leadership and it's still happening. It's like any business, you're still evolving. New people come in, they've got new ideas, they have seen something at another company that they bring in, and often they'll bring other people with them that share the same thoughts. And I think it's probably a couple of years ago, and I think the shift has been quite natural. It actually has felt really natural in terms of where we were aligned before. So we were sitting alongside sales ops in terms of what they were doing and trying to leverage, whether we were talking about territory planning, whether we were talking about figures, whatever it might be. We were still aligned with them, but we weren't necessarily thinking about our role as directly impacting that revenue. So I think what we've realized is that enablement was separate from revenue outcomes. But I think now we've realized that actually there's a role to play in being able to help. If pipeline quality is weak, if managers are coaching inconsistently, if sellers cannot articulate value, or if inspection is shallow, then they're not learning those problems in isolation. They're not training. People used to say, oh, you're just training. They're not training moments anymore. They're revenue problems, because if they can't do these things, there's going to be an impact on that bottom line. I think this is where kind of the idea of revenue acceleration becomes more meaningful than, I suppose, in that traditional enablement language. It really does reflect a more direct connection now to the bottom line. And organizationally, what's changed is that leadership now, I think, are starting to expect our teams not just to produce programs, but to improve execution, quality, judgment, and ultimately performance. It's part of our KPIs, looking at performance, whether it's time to ramp, time to first deal. All of those things now appear in that structure, whereas before it would have just been like, oh yeah, I trained 100 people this week on this, to put it at its most raw. I think what we're looking at now is really that, like I say, that management of attention, intervention, and what I would say judgment. So yeah, it's exciting. I love the transition. I'm one of those people, I really enjoy change, which is nice.
One of the things I'm a big proponent as a sales trainer is a big proponent in a value in title, right? Jay will tell you, if you have CEO in your title, it's easier to make sales. It's just because, right? There's part of that. But the other side of it, as a sales trainer, I would always insist on a different title and just testing out what works. But this revenue accelerator really helps everybody, I would think, allows the executives and others around you to start to think of you differently than what they've seen. Like what sales ops used to be was just, I work with sales and sales process. And now it's becoming RevOps, which is now revenue. And there's creating that the executive decision making and whose authority and what you're supposed to be looking at. Departments are being more receptive to you. I think the same idea is that I'm a revenue accelerator. That gets finance involved. That gets like everybody's like, okay, it may be interesting. Just a thought. I would test that out because I think that's a great title. But I think because it does speak to where revenue management is going, and it also speaks to the kind of roles that are needed.
I think the great thing is you can sit as across those three modes. So like we have field execution, which, where we've got a lovely team who are directly aligned with sales leaders. You have a business value team, which is there to specifically hands-on deals. So you've got that really nice focus then on deal and opportunity execution in terms of, yes, that is the true help. And then in that engine room in the background, we've got our communications engine that sits there making sure that they're getting the right information when they need it, not too much information, curation of information if it's needed, like you say, onboarding, everboarding, all of those things that then make up what would have been maybe traditional enablement. But now everything sits hand in hand, side by side, and it is all of your responsibility to make sure that you are able to help with either the propensity or the revenue of the opportunities that we have. So yeah, I think it's great. And I think it does feel like a very natural progression.
When we were talking in the past, you did say that you have gone through very different contexts when it comes to revenue execution. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right from a startup, it is one salesperson doesn't care about pipeline and doesn't have the rhythm of enterprise, but at the same time, global teams with multiple field roles with layered execution. And in both the conversations, you said the common theme is really the business rhythm. So my question really to you is, who in this modern revenue org, what we are talking about, the whole revenue management, who actually owns that rhythm? How would you define that?
Do you know what? I don't think it actually revenue execution belongs to one team, and it's maybe not. But I do think the business owns the outcome. The front line and second line managers really own that execution part in practice because they own inspection, coaching, deal quality day to day. So there's that ownership there and they need to take control of that. You can give them tools and show them how, but essentially they're in control. Teams like us, Enablement, RevOps, product marketing, we're there to essentially build, I would say, the system around them. We all have to work together in order to make that whole revenue engine work. So it's like the analogy. It's like if we take a car at the end of the day, we need to have an engine. And I think that's where we have, like I say, product marketing ourselves. We're all sitting there being that engine for them. And they're on the outside driving it. And that's them. I don't think you can explicitly say that one function because they can't own all of that execution alone.
Your analogy you gave, like it's a car, it's an engine.
Yeah.
It needs to be really well tuned if you want the car to run smoothly at a higher speed, right? And there has to be somebody in the driving seat, driving it also, right? So maybe the question is little different than one person or one team owning it. The question would be, how do you tune that sales engine from revenue execution perspective? Okay. And then who, in your opinion, should really be in the driving seat? Is it a CRO? Is it, or there are different type of deals, right? That's also very much possible.
Ultimately, we sit under the CRO. So the ultimate responsibility, if you're going to give it a driver, is going to be this. But it's like anything. CRO is just the CRO in terms of they're one person. And we all normally say it takes a village to do these things. And I think you have to have alignment. If you don't have that alignment across, then it's going to fail. We could be really good at building our systems and reinforcement and things like that and process and giving them the resources, but we could have sales directors that are not consistent in their approach. We would be able to identify that through looking at statistics and things like that and then focus in on where that issue is so we could help with that alignment, help bring it back on track and vice versa. If we looked at our onboarding figures, and I think this is where the data in this environment becomes so important for us to keep reviewing it as well. But yeah, I don't think as much as the CRO might be the driver, that car ain't going anywhere if it hasn't got an engine, if it hasn't got a chassis, if it hasn't got wheels. All of those,
You're in the pit crew, and how organized and cohesive is the pit crew is how much time the race car sits in the sidelines, right? Like, gotta have everybody doing their thing. Yeah,
F1's a good analogy.
Anyway, that's execution things, helping that driver get back on the road.
It's what they call the 1%, isn't it? If you can keep kind of like adding on that 1%, I think incremental change for me is always a good thing.
I definitely want to move to AI because AI is being the centerpiece for everybody. And I think RevOps have been super excited about AI and how it can help them and their sales teams to really do it. And You also described the use of AI in, I think, two specific ways, right? One was the AI coaching tool, so reps can practice conversational intelligence, competency at scale, and having a conversational or an AI generated track definitely helps. So my question really is, how do you design AI, right? So because it's a fast running train. So you are trying to modify really an engine in this case of a running train. It's not, you're not modifying a compartment, you're really modifying the engine because AI is fundamentally changing the architecture. So in your view, how do you design this AI stack in a way that accelerates our human storytelling? Because you said with Gen AI, your storytelling can really be very powerful and can be at scale. So how do you design that and, give me or give us your insights onto how this can be done?
So I think the most useful way that we've been looking at is to kind of treat it as a support for human thinking. It's not actually a replacement for it. I think we often, people think it's going to replace people's jobs and things like that. I think that's going to be true in some aspects, depends on what you do. But I think in these scenarios, it's just going to make you better. Like I've found in my everyday, it just makes me better. It's like my co-pilot. It will help set me up for the day. I can help prioritize my workloads. But I think a modern revenue stack, let's talk about this broadly first off. It shouldn't really mean that there's like more tools for the sake of tools. It should mean a more connected system that really reduces admin work, raises that signal quality, helps the field spend more time on that high value customer work and revenue generation. That's what we want them to do. We want them to spend their time better. So I think there are so many ways AI has helped, like I say, in my day to day. It does make light work of things like generating our success stories to share with the field. That used to be such an arduous task. Getting the information out of the field, writing it up in a way that was cohesive, then getting it approved, so on and so forth. We used to be able to do maybe one every couple of weeks. And now 8 to 10 a week.
Wow.
Right, and get out. It's improved the process so much. And so these are those like repeatable skills that we can then utilize just in our, like I say, our day to day. So that's how it impacts our, if you like, storytelling as well, sharing that knowledge in the field. But my favorite use case, as you touched upon, is the AI coaching. This is all about us helping reps gain confidence. And it is in storytelling. It's how do they position our products, our solutions by putting value at the forefront and not feature, and really getting them to practice that conversational competency. And we can do this at scale with the AI coaching. Before, you'd be having a scenario where you'd invite the rep, have the conversation, give them a scorecard, and it wasn't great. There is kind of positives to it in that you could listen and start to understand what it is that maybe there was something that all of them didn't really understand. So you could utilize that information and then feed that back into some of your materials. But now we can do this at scale. We can do it whereby they can just practice. There's no judgment, and it will give them some really good coaching feedback. You can do it as well so that it can go to their manager and we can get a human to do it too. But the idea is that they can just practice, get that feedback and just gain that confidence, I think. And obviously, when we think about goals here, this isn't about them either, like being script dependent. I think we can focus too much sometimes on giving people scripts. Just say this. And they don't really know. They don't understand what it is that they're talking about. The goal of this at scale is so that this obviously helps it feel a bit more human, even though they're using AI. So realistically, AI is going to help them, you help the seller prepare for their meetings, frame and discover better, I think. I think it's not there to flatten every interaction, should we say, into the same talk track. That isn't what we're trying to achieve. I think if we want to get that kind of real curiosity-driven discovery, the rep really does have to internalize their thinking underneath that message. And I think AI helps us accelerate that, but it's never going to be a substitute. And in its broadest sense, AI is definitely most valuable when it operationalizes a clear standard, for example. If your sales method or rhythm or whatever it is starts out fuzzy, all you're going to do is scale fuzziness and inconsistency. So you do have to make sure that like all the things you're putting in is quality and it's been validated. And then you can scale it because then you're scaling quality and consistency. And that's the same for anything, whether it's a process, whether it's your sales methodology, whether it's the way you qualify, or whether it's the way you talk about your products. And we don't talk about products, we talk about value. So to get them into that mindset of being value driven, that's where this comes in to help them.
I think it's so critical The thing I'm seeing is that the better prepared AI can enable a salesperson about like the more knowledgeable I am about a prospect before I get in there, the more space I have to create that curiosity driven discovery conversation where it's like, oh, you guys are doing this, or are you having issues here? And I'm pointing to that, and then we get into this deeper conversation, which leads to, again, like a med pick, like what's the value of that? What's the cost of that? What's
Mm,
the pain of that? Right? So it might be two situations, but it takes 8 hours to solve those two situations. Would you like those 8 hours back? Maybe that's worth looking at now that you say you don't want a whole system, but maybe this is something we can think through. So I do think that there's an element there where you're actually giving salespeople more creative freedom because you're
mm.
taking away a lot of the mundane data they got to get to. They got to get through that mundane data. And if they don't, if they go in unprepared on their own, they spend more time of their hour figuring out those basics as opposed to starting from those basics and moving to that next conversation.
If you can as well give a little bit of consistency across approach. So
Mm,
we've got like you have repeatable skills. So they're just prompts that are already written and you just reuse them. And you can broadcast them around the company. So you can share these skills, a bit like a gem. And this, I think, has been brilliant in a case of if you're asking a rep, they're going into a discovery conversation, and it's like, okay, here's all the tools you need. If you're talking to this person, say this. If you're talking to this person, they care about this, so on and so forth. Uncover these metrics. And it's this massive sort of checklist. Oh my God, who wants to read a checklist? I don't. I don't even want to create one. But what I can do is I can package it all up into a repeatable, consistent process for the rep. And all they do is copy and paste their opportunity into the system, apply the prompt, press a button, and woof, I've given them a discovery call prep. They can then iterate, ask questions. And this is what I think this is where the encouragement comes is discovery in their own ability to use AI. That in an exploration and like I say, iteration. Just ask it a question. After you've done that first bit, if there's something you think's not quite right, ask it. Ask it again. Ask it until you think you've got the right picture that you're going to then paint for your customer. And there's still consistent skills, I think, that go alongside AI, a seller being able to whiteboard. I think that's a really important skill because I think if you're able to talk and draw in the moment and paint that picture for your customer as they talk, I think that is something then that you're helping the customer to resonate with what's going on and they're building it. It's their idea coming out. And actually, you'll find that you'll end up with a better conversation because they'll correct you as well. They'll correct you if you start doing something wrong. Oh, no, it's not like that. It's like this. And you're like, oh, cool. And who looks after this bit? And see, it provides that more natural conversation stream. So I think you can't have one without the other. We've still got that piece where you need to have those things side by side. It's not a lone wolf.
excellent. Joanna, this has been a wonderful conversation. Us from one enablement person to another revenue accelerator. It's been a real joy. And so we just thank you for giving us all of your wonderful insights. You have built some really dynamic stuff at Ping Identity and you're helping companies grow. And that's just brilliant. And so for everyone here, thank you so much for tuning in to our podcast. And I appreciate it if you would like and share and subscribe and tell your friends, send it to other revenue operations and revenue leaders to help them figure out what they need to build or where their gaps might be that they can say, okay, we need to step in this area here. We'd love to hear how things are going for you. And if you are interested in becoming a guest, we'd love to have a conversation with you as well. So thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you, Joanna.